Line's good.
Never on!
Whoa.
Hard! Hardly.
Come on, Brent. Line's good. Got real close.
The hair high, right?
Try and hit 2/3.
Have they saved it for her? Yes, they have.
Ooh, welcome to Game of Stones, everybody. I am Sean Graham, Scott. Alongside, as always, hello, Scott.
Sean, I'm back. I had a lot of adventures.
You did. You were all over the place.
Yeah. Thank you for covering for me. But yeah, here we are, ready to talk some curling in the summer.
Yeah, here we are. The start of August. The next curling season is upon us. But before we get into the next curling season, we actually have one news story that we wanted to talk about, which we'll talk about at the end of the show. Scott, I've been very much taken by the Canadian women's soccer scandal, which I guess is really Canada soccer in general, but the precipitating event of the scandal was a drone over the New Zealand team's practice prior to the Olympic Games. Then it turns out from all the reporting that Soccer Canada has done this for a while on both of the men's and the women's side. But to this point, it's only been the women's team that has really had to deal with any of the ramifications of what has happened. So they were docked 6 points in the Olympics, still qualified for the knockout round anyway, before losing to Germany in the quarterfinals. So Scott, I've been very much taken by this. Now, before we get into, we're going to talk about potential scandals in curling too. This is going to be entirely fictional. We're going to make up scenarios in which scandals could happen in curling that are even slightly analogous to what happened with Soccer Canada. But Scott, what is your perception or take been on the Canada soccer scandal?
I've sort of been thinking, like, how can it really provide an advantage? You get to see them kicking the ball back and forth to each other. Like, okay, I get it. There's, formations and tactics and all that kind of stuff. But like, every national team game is on film somewhere.
Yeah.
Presumably everybody has access to it. You know what the squad is going to do. You can coach up your players for that. I just don't understand what the advantage is that you're gaining.
Right.
And with the consequences being such as they are, it seems not worth it. And then, and then for the team to go and win anyway, sort of says to me, like, they didn't really need it. So why did you do it?
Yeah, I think the one thing for me, the women on the team are classier than I am, but I really wanted one of them or all of them to really lean into it. And especially after the New Zealand game, the reporter questions aren't usually that interesting, but they always ask, what was the key in the game? I really wanted them just to say, we knew what they were going to do. That's what I wanted the answer to be, and just lean into this heel turn they had going. But they're classier than that. But yeah, I agree that all the games are on TV. You're not going to learn that much, but that's why to me, it's kind of a fun scandal. Like, yes, I guess there's a rule against doing this, but as James Sherman said, it's not state secrets that we're dealing with here. Like, all these coaches in all these sports need to just calm down. Like, you're not doing anything that unique. You're not Dwight Eisenhower planning D-Day here. Take it easy. So that's sort of all that, but that has sort of made me interested in it, is that to me, it's a scandal with, yes, there are people who might've been harmed by it, but I don't necessarily see that much damage that was done.
No, I think the damage was given to the perpetrators, and as unfortunate what do they call it? Like, innocent bystanders. I guess nobody who's bystanding has ever been guilty. You don't hear about guilty bystanders, right?
That's the nature of bystanding.
You're, by definition, you're innocent. But the women on the team really came together and overcame it, which was kind of cool to see. And yeah, the people who are responsible have been dealt with. One would presume so. Yeah, almost no harm, no foul to the bystanders.
Yeah, and I think too there was a really funny tweet. I think it was Arash Madani found a job posting for Canada Soccer from back in February. I guess he must have went on our Internet Archive or something, or maybe it was even still up. And one of the assets that were listed was being able to fly a drone, which it was just funny. I guess they must use
Wow.
drones too in their own practice. I don't know, but anyway, this story has made us think about what could a good curling scandal be, and I want to say a good curling scandal because I don't want anyone to really be hurt by this. Like scandals where people are hurt are not good. So what would be like a fun type of a curling scandal, something that we could really dig our teeth into in a fun way and sort of really get into like a lot of content and a lot of fun? Because as we've talked about, you and I offline, Scott, I think any curling team at the world level would let another curling team at the world level sit there and watch their practice, which, side note, is actually what happens at these events because you're all practicing at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And before anybody screams at us and says, "Hey guys, there was a curling scandal. It's called Broomgate. There's a podcast about it." Yeah, we know. And I recommend going to listen to that podcast. But what we're talking about, like that scandal wasn't really a scandal in that nobody was trying. They were all playing within the rules.
Yeah.
And nobody was trying to like get one over on somebody else necessarily. I'm sure there was a little bit of bad blood where you think, okay, I can really give it to this team that's been beaten to me by doing something different. But as John Cullen himself will admit, it's the closest thing curling has to a scandal. And so maybe not even meet the definition totally of scandal.
Yeah, it's a case where, I don't think anyone was necessarily doing anything in the moment to get one over or to cheat, to actively cheat. One, because the brooms were legal. And two, you can see what broom people are using, right? So it's not, so the scandal was about the integrity of the sport as opposed to one team trying to get something over on another team. And yes, we would certainly recommend that podcast. Go listen to that. It's really well done by John Cullen. So these are things where it's like someone trying to get something over on somebody else in theory.
Yeah, that's what that's the list of hypotheticals we've come up with.
Yeah. So there's a few here that we've talked about and that we've looked at. One would be money. Now, this kind of goes against what I said about not necessarily being a taking something away from somebody else or not really have any harm, because obviously the margins in curling and when it comes to the finances are so small that really taking any money would hurt somebody else. But what I'm thinking, Scott, in terms of the financial side of things is, let's say, and I don't know if this actually happens, but two teams agree going into, say, a final, say, we'll just split the pot, right? Just whatever it is, we'll split. Let's go have a good game. And one team tries a strategy that they wouldn't normally try because, well, we just want to try some things out, see how it goes. We know we're going to split the pot. And then the other team after the game who wins says, what are you talking about?
Right.
I don't know what you're talking about. We won the game fair and square. I don't know if that counts.
Come at us.
Yeah. Like, would that count as a fun scandal? I don't know.
I mean, I think the scandal would be that they decide to split the pot before the game, right? That's that sort of goes against everything. You're competing against each other. You shouldn't be. It doesn't matter who wins,
Yeah. Yeah, it takes away the competitive spirit.
Yeah. I think that's pretty bad. Other money situations you mentioned, Sean, would be like a teammate taking a bigger share of the pot as opposed to splitting it evenly amongst the teammates. There could be one person on the team that pays for the expenses and thus recoups the expenses first, and then it's split four ways. But if there's somebody that's just telling everybody, oh yeah, it's totally even, and it's not, I don't
Yeah.
know.
I believe that's called theft.
Yeah. Theft,
Yeah.
fraud.
Yeah, and I'd be actually curious to know what kind of contracts these teams have, because presumably at the highest level, you would have a contract amongst the four of you of here's what we're going to do relative to the finances, and it would not surprise me, Scott, if there are certain teams at the elite level where it's written in a contract that a certain player or two actually get a higher share of winnings than others.
Yeah.
So in that case, that's not really a scandal if everybody agrees to it and goes in eyes wide open and it's fully transparent. But yes, if somebody is stealing money, that would certainly be a scandal.
I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, we talk a lot about the possibility of a betting scandal.
Yeah.
So throwing games, point shaving, if that's even possible in curling, I'm not sure. But yeah, like the influx of gambling in our culture in the last 4 years has been crazy.
Yeah.
And like you talked about the margins in curling not being huge. It could be tempting then for a team or a player on a team without the knowledge of their teammates taking some steps to ensure the outcome of a game.
Yeah. I think the challenge of that for a player, and something that actually I think protects the sport, is that from what I gather from the people we've talked to, the amount of money that's being bet on curling, despite the Bet 365 commercial that we are confronted with constantly, both during
we
Blue
named
Jay
that-
games and the Olympics.
Name that number 2 out of the year or
Something like that. Yeah, it's way down for me now. If we were to redo that, it is so much lower for me now. But there's not that much money moving on curling. So if suddenly a $10,000 bet shows up on a curling game, that's going to raise all the red flags, and something is going to be caught in that. So there's some protection in that sense of it. But if a player wants to do, say, $50 a pop over the course of televised games, Briar games, Scotty's games, it could, I mean, you're not going to get rich off of it, but you could make some money.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I'm sure that they all have like no gambling on your own team or your own games kind of stipulations written in there, but who knows?
Yeah. I actually do wonder what the rules are, because based off of the Vegas experience during the World Championships and Continental Cups, they're not banned from the casinos. So
Yeah, I
they
mean-
can bet. Whereas I think other sports that are, well, there's no league in curling, right? There's no collective bargaining agreement. Whereas
Yeah.
the NFL can say to guys, you can't go into casinos, or you can't bet on where you're at team facilities, or whatever the rules are, as weird as some of them may be. You don't have that in curling.
No, that's right.
So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
That has been on the bold predictions at least once.
I think it still is, Sean, that
Yeah.
we're gonna have a curling scandal to talk about.
Yeah, so I have to adjudicate that. So yeah, throwing games would be 1 point shavings. Another one, Scott, this one isn't really necessarily fun, is obviously PEDs. You could have a PED scandal with that. And of course, we had the situation at the Scotties. So that's still, as far as I know, still being adjudicated, and it's the appeal is still in place. So won't comment on that one specifically, because we don't know how that will ultimately turn out. But what I would want is, for a scandal, is if somebody just comes out and says that, yeah, they're using PEDs and says, this is why I'm doing it, and okay. Because it does get tiresome when somebody gets popped for a positive test. And because the answer is, you can kind of write the statement.
Yeah.
And that's what is not fun about PEDs. That's not the only thing that's not fun about PEDs, but sort of it's this wash, rinse, repeat of all the stories. And
Right.
the sad reality of it is that when it is either a false positive or someone has been prescribed something and it just didn't register in the moment, that maybe some paperwork was missed, or in the case of this really weird Gatorade story that I think a guy from, was it South Africa or somewhere, got popped on a positive test that, and forgive me if it's not Gatorade, but they had this special formula and he tested positive and he appealed it, blaming the company. And the company, even though they were supposed to have the batch saved of the stuff, didn't. And this kid lost his appeal, isn't in the Olympics. Sally Jenkins wrote about it in the Washington Post and absolutely obliterated the company, which she is the best in the world at doing that.
Yes.
Like those sorts of cases, when it's a successful appeal, that tends to get lost. Right. The initial suspension is what you remember more so than those that have a successful appeal.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it takes so long for that appeals process to play out that by the time you are set, they say, oh, no, you're fine. Everybody's made up their mind already. And the news cycle has sort of moved on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
Gatorade.
Yeah. Is it Gatorade?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, she just takes them to blast in the Washington Post, which is a great column. And she's great at doing that.
That she is.
Yeah. So let's see. It's a teenage sprinter who takes the hit on this. So yeah, I would recommend that article too. I'll link to it in the show notes if you want to take a look at that. Sometimes the Washington Post, this one appears to be freely available. So hopefully everybody can take a look at that if you are interested. But yeah, PEDs is one. Scott, there could also be a TV scandal in here somewhere. And to me, the scandal, we have to go back a bit to, for anyone who remembers, the Country Canada days where TSN ever so briefly lost the rights to Season of Champions events. They went to the CBC and the CBC put them on Country Canada, a little known and little available television station and
cable channel.
Yeah. People were angry, so much so that there were online petitions or calls. I believe people had to get the Canadian Radio Telecommunications Commission involved at some point. There were complaints to them. The channel did not show morning draws. They streamed them in the very early days of streaming, 2006 and 7. And something along these lines, where if there's a seismic shift in television coverage, particularly if it gets worse, that would be a scandal in the world of curling that could potentially be very interesting to follow.
Yeah. And I think for me, seeing how the demographics of curling change over time, I'm very interested to see how the consumption of curling will change in the future. People like you and me, middle-aged, as maybe you're not middle-aged yet, but are like more adept at streaming things. We've been doing it for a long time, as opposed to the generation that's out there that watches on TV more now. But then as the generations grow up, and sort of the TikTok generation who's used to consuming things in smaller bites, do they influence how decisions are made at broadcasters about things like curling coverage or other professional sports coverage? To be honest, it's the most lucrative thing in television right now is live sports. But how does the audience change that being the most lucrative? I'm really curious about that. And sometimes it takes, like, Curling Canada going on to this CBC contract was probably, 15 years too early.
Yeah.
Right now you can watch all the games on tsn.ca. If they're playing, some hockey or a Raptors game, you can go online and get it, or you can get it on an alternate cable channel, right? Like, not all of TSN is available to everybody with basic cable. So this sort of shift, I think that's a good example where they were a little ahead of where things are going. And what broadcasters need to do is to pivot at the right time and not do it too early, but definitely not do it too late, where they're stuck in an old cable model that doesn't work. And then they sort of back themselves into a corner where they can't pivot out of it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting environment right now, as you say. And one of the challenges, or one of the things that I think people who follow this, and I really like Richard Deitch in The Athletic and Andrew Marchand and Jimmy Tran at Sports Illustrated. They talk about this sort of stuff a lot, where there's obviously the NBA just signed its deal for whatever $80 billion or whatever it is. And the NFL is untouchable. And then you have baseball, which is kind of weird. It's all over the place, but it still makes a lot of money. The NHL a little less. And the NHL rights are coming up in Canada in a couple of years, which will be very interesting, because most of the analysis I've read is that Rogers has not even come close to making money on that deal. So what'll happen? But those top tier sports are not untouchable, but pretty safe. It's the middle class of sports. It's kind of what's happening in curling in general, that the top tier is fine, but it's that middle class. What happens to them? And curling, I think, would probably fall into that category. Now, the reality is, of course, that Curling Canada pays TSN for the time and then recoups the money itself. So the contract is different than TSN paying for the rights to curling, but it does create this dynamic for Curling Canada of what is the biggest audience potentially, and how do we generate that audience? And is it still on TSN, and is it somewhere else? Or do we lean more into the streaming side of it? Curling Canada Plus, for instance. But, TSN or Rogers, if they ever wanted to go to Rogers, are such, because TSN, for anyone who's not in Canada, is owned by Bell. So you got Bell on one side, Rogers on the other side, the two principal telecommunication companies in this country. Just the exposure that comes from being with those distributors is immense. So future of curling television rights and what comes of it will be quite interesting, especially now with the Grand Slams, with the new direction that they're going in. How does Rogers sort of deal with that? And what does that mean for the sport writ large in terms of how it's covered on linear television, but also with regards to streaming? Like, will the Grand Slams, for instance, stream the first 2 days of their events now? That I'm really curious to see if that's a move they make.
Yeah, I think if they can figure out a model where producing it is cheap enough, then they'll do it. But
cheap enough, but also with quality, right? I think that you can do it. You can do it for cheap. That's easy. You got the overhead camera set up. You could just have that, but you want to make it so that it's at least a product that people are going to recognize from what they've seen normally from you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what Curling Stadium has designed as a relatively inexpensive package for clubs to be able to broadcast their games, I think something similar to that, obviously a little higher quality. I don't know, that it's pretty high as it is, but something like that, and having that available to audiences on those first 2 days, if that can drive people to something like whatever, is it Sportsnet 1, Sportsnet Plus, everything's Plus or 1, or maybe come up with a more creative name. Sportsnet Now, I don't know.
Sportsnet Now sounds right.
Yeah, so like if it can drive people towards that, maybe that's has an impact. I think like there's room for innovation in curling television, and it could be a shock, which could create what's a kind of scandal. But if it's done properly, it should be like boiling a frog in water, right? Where you don't even realize it's changed, and then you're like, oh, it's different now, but it's okay.
Yeah. Also, what kind of, how does the scientist know that the frog doesn't feel it? Surely the frog has to feel it, but I'm not a scientist.
Yeah, but they
You
don't
are.
jump right out.
Yeah, that's true. They don't.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it'll be curious. And another thing too, like, I think Richard Deitch has written this, that generally speaking, or no, sorry, excuse me, it was John Shannon. Was Canada is usually 5 to 10 years behind the United States in these things, and so look at stuff like the Amazon deal for the NFL.
Yeah.
That hasn't come to Canada yet because the TSN rights for the NFL are different. But on the next re-up, what happens? So it'll be really curious to see how things progress here.
And just quickly, like, I don't know if you've been watching the Olympics on streaming. It's terrible. Like, even in this year, 2024, the stream is so bad. Like, I can't manually choose the quality. And so I was watching the basketball game yesterday, and it just kept skipping backwards 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And I'm like, this isn't live. I know, because I already heard this happen.
Right. Yeah.
Then I
that's
close the
weird.
whole thing, reopen it. Anyway,
The other thing too about the IOC, we talked about this during the Beijing Olympics. I've noticed it a little bit. Not that I watch a lot of Summer Olympic sports other than at the Olympics.
Yeah.
But it does feel like it's produced by people who are in the television business, but don't produce that sport regularly, because there's always weird cuts. They're not showing you necessarily the thing that the commentators are talking about, which is the nature of having a world feed and national commentators on things.
Mm-hmm.
But surely you could hire people who do that sport all the time.
There can't be that many, right? Like that there's, like, there's
sure
not that much demand that they're not available.
Dressage team that goes around and does dressage every week on the circuit. Hire those people.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, they can't be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm doing another dressage event at this time. I'm unavailable.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Anyway, so broadcasting, there's a lot of good stuff that's going to come from broadcasting, and it could rise to the level of scandal. But even if not, it's going to be interesting to talk about. Yeah.
All right. Another category of scandal is to be a coach or a fifth. And Scott, the idea that you had was that they'd be tipping information somehow.
Yeah, I think this is something where, like, oh, we got to bring a fifth to this event. We don't have a fifth with us all the time. Let's bring somebody in, and maybe that fifth, has ulterior motives and is giving away some state secrets, or, they're, they don't like the coach, or the coach and them have some sort of side thing going on where they're matching stones, but they're telling the team the wrong match, that kind of thing. Like, I don't know that there's anything that would rise to that level. Like, why would they do that? Right? Like, to what benefit? But it could just be like a personal grudge kind of thing. That could happen.
Yeah, a coach gets dismissed, or a player was on a team and the team breaks up and it's not amicable and they want to get back somehow. That could be a way to potentially do it. Or again, like, I guess it comes back to betting potentially, or who knows what it could potentially be. Another thing though, Scott, that I thought would be very funny, and this, I guess there would be harm in this potentially, but it would also be, I think, very funny. So after practice, so for anyone who doesn't know, at a Scotties Briar World Championship, after the evening draw, teams have practice ice for 15 minutes, and it's predetermined who gets what sheet and for how long. So the fifths and the coaches are the ones who usually do it. If a team that's playing the evening draw has a sheet, usually the players won't, but sometimes guys will come back, especially if they don't play the morning draw. So sometimes members of the full team are there, but there's always the fifth and the coach there at those practice sessions. So here's what I think would be hilarious. Coach or fifth goes to the locker room afterwards, changes, and doesn't leave, hides in the shower or in a bathroom stall or something. The ice makers all go home. The coach or fifth comes out to the ice, and flips the stones. So they're playing the morning draw the next day. Flips the stones that the opponents will throw the next day.
Ooh, so like takes the
handle off.
put a
Yeah.
stone on the other stone.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Flips them, doesn't say anything, obviously. And the whole next game, the team's like, these ones don't seem matched. They were matched yesterday.
yeah,
Like, I don't think this
Yeah.
one's good. Yeah, I think that would be a fun little scandal.
yeah. That would be pretty. That would be a big scandal, I think. Yeah, like
Yeah.
because presumably they wouldn't want to get caught.
Of course.
But yeah, if they got caught, oof, that could be like long bans from the game.
Could be lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dang. That would be quite the scandal for sure.
Yeah. Especially if you combine the two. So
Mm,
obviously
mhm.
this would never happen, but it's Jules, right? Let's say it's Jules. So Jules is working with Brad Gushu. He goes and he flips the rocks, but it's the rocks of Brad Gushu's team.
Yeah.
And so then he gives Brad Gushu his rock book, knowing that they're no longer matched.
Yeah.
So that's something like that.
And then everyone would come off the ice scratching their heads like, oh, I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on. I think
Right.
they'd figure it out eventually, but it might be too late at that point.
Yeah. Down 6-0 or whatever.
Yeah. Shoot.
So that one I think would be fun.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. And then finally, Scott, this was one you came up with. You just said patch scandal.
Yeah. Something happens in the patch. What it is, I don't know. Somebody gets a little crazy in the patch, shows up worse for wear the next day.
Yeah.
Has to recuse themselves in the middle of the game, perhaps. I think that would be a pretty scandalous. There could be some, relationshipy things happening in the patch.
Yeah.
Some breaking of the trust of your friends and perhaps teammates, that kind of thing. Like something crazy, man. Crazy stuff happens in the patch. I don't stay there too late. I got to get up in the morning to go cover curling when I'm at these events. So, I'm there for a drink or two, but after that, I'm heading out. And as curling has become what it is now, there's less and less of this. But at those events where once a team's eliminated, they just go to the patch. That's not going to be a scandal. That's just fun and part of the culture of curling.
Of course.
But if you're still in it and you decide, why not? Let's
Why not, eh?
let's go have some fun.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself.
Well, the other one too, though, is I think where there could be a legit scandal potentially is sort of in this like reality show vein, especially around the quadrennial. So you're at the patch, and from all accounts, a lot of teams are made and broken at the patch.
Yeah.
So you make a deal with one guy, or you have this team set up, and then you break your word, like that sort of in that reality show type way, like Survivor, Big Brother, of like, we had a deal sort of thing, and then it's not. I think that could potentially be a bit of a scandal. And obviously, as you say, anywhere where there's a bar, things can go crazy. There was one event where a player did not make it for the morning, and the question afterwards was to one of the teammates was, "Oh, like sort of out too late last night," and the response, if I recall correctly, was, "Oh no, I saw him this morning and didn't look great," which didn't really answer the question. Like, it could have been sick. Like, could have just come down with something like a flu, cold, whatever, which makes you not look great. But it could also be hungover. Like, it could happen. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there was a very funny answer, as I recall. So things can happen at the patch, and again, as long as they're all in kind of good, relatively good fun.
Yeah.
is what we
But
want.
it's if they like if it raises to the level of like some nastiness or
Yeah, we don't want that.
no, that's where it could be the scandal, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's, in doing this show, one of the things that I realized is that it's hard for scandals to be fun.
Yeah, it
You know?
is. It is because when we have to talk about them, we're kind of like, oh man,
Yeah.
yes, it's newsy, and like my non-curling friends will text me about it and be like, "Oh man, are you going to talk about this?" And I'm like, "I guess we have to,"
Yeah.
but yeah, I'd much rather talk about the games and the X's and O's instead of the Jimmys and Joes.
There you
Or,
go.
is that how it goes?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's,
Yeah.
yep. So there you go. So those are some scandals potentially that we came up with. Obviously, there are other ones that would be worse to have to talk about to exist in the sport. These were ones that are relatively harmless, and by harmless I mean like nobody is injured or anything like that. Like we don't need
Yeah.
a Galooly type situation in the sport.
No, we're not looking for a Galooly.
No, absolutely not. So those are what we came up with. Let us know if you have any other ones that are comparable and things that we could potentially talk about that would be interesting scandals within the sport that are possible, because that's our list right there. So with that, I'll say thank you so much. Oh, no, I won't even say that. Scott, we have news. One piece of news.
Oh yeah, news.
I did tease news at the start. The World Curling Federation, back on the 17th of July, 2024, announced the first ever World Junior Mixed Doubles Curling Championship that will be held in Edmonton from May 6 to 11, 2025 at the Saville Community Sports Center. This is hearkening back to the original days of Mixed Doubles World Championship, and that is going to be an open entry event. So any member association is eligible to submit. Format will be determined once the number of entries is determined. But this is a kind of a very fun initiative with mixed doubles being an Olympic discipline. Does make sense to me for it to have a junior world championship, another avenue to develop the game, to develop specialists. And I know a lot of discussion has been had about the idea of specialist versus the specialist in the 4-person game, and what is the health of the sport relative to those two different tracks. But Scott, this is very much to me a sign from the World Curling Federation that having that track of from the time you get into the sport, you can really be a mixed doubles player at a high level. The addition of this event really cements that mixed doubles clearly is not going anywhere for the World Curling Federation.
Yeah, for sure. This is really good. Like you said, I'm happy that it's an open competition. I hope there will be a lot of member associations that put forward teams for this. I hope that there's funding available, from the World Curling Federation for those member associations. So, yeah, pretty cool, exciting. The Saville Center is like a huge club arena kind of place, like big curling center. The teams that go will presumably get to interact with some of the local curling celebrities, and Kevin Martin's the organizing chair, so I'm sure he'll pull some of his friends in to help with this. And yeah, I think it'll be really, really cool.
Yeah, so good initiative for the World Curling Federation, and as you say, we'll be very interested observers of this when it comes around in the spring. So with that, I will say thanks so much for listening, everybody. If you have not yet, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Like, rate, comment, all that good stuff helps other people find the show, keeps us growing. Of course, head on over to GameOfStonesPod.com. All of our past episodes are there, plus a link to the merch. You can follow along on social media at Game of Stones Pod, Game of Stones Podcast on Facebook. And if you want to let us know what you want to hear on the show, Game of Stones Podcast at gmail.com. Scott, it is the midst of summer.
That it is.
But I should note that I did curl in not that recent of the past.
That's right. You got to go to North Bay for their big summer spiel.
Yeah, so I played in that event about a month ago now, and It was a lot of fun, Scott. This spiel has been going on for a really long time. It's a really unique setup on how they fund it, because putting ice in the summer is expensive, but they've managed to figure out a way to do this actually very economically, where there's a clinic on how to put in ice. So people pay to put in the ice for this event. And then there is also a camp afterwards. So the spiel starts Friday and Sunday, and then Monday through Thursday, maybe Friday, there's a junior camp for the week. So it's a really great idea, I think, on how to fund this event. And there are teams that go all the time. There are some people who, let's just say, are never going to lose to the likes of me in this event. We ran into one of them and lost to that team. But really fun event. Nobody takes it really particularly seriously because, as was pointed out several times when there was discussions on our team on what the strategy should be, it's July.
The strategy should be have fun, throw your rocks, don't get hurt.
Yeah. Everybody makes it home in one piece. Yeah. That is really the focus of it.
That's
so a really delightful event. Would certainly encourage anybody who's interested to participate if you would like to. Spots, it was full, but it wasn't full as soon as it opened. I think based on what we saw, a lot of teams do it every year. A lot of return teams, a lot of folks know each other. First time for me and our whole team, but a wonderful event in North Bay, even with the shad flies in July, is a wonderful place.
Yes, the shad flies.
Yes, the shad flies. Yeah. So, Scott, I should say too that it was very exciting in the one game. Played against, I should say, Laura Frigette, who is the relatively new, I guess, Northern Ontario Curling Association Executive Director. Played against her. One day there will be very lengthy tomes about the Mike Harris era at Northern Ontario Curling. But now it's Laura. Had the pleasure to play against her. If she listens to this, and she said that she's listened to some episodes, and I know she was telling the truth because she commented on how we ripped the Northern Ontario Curling Association stream for the provincial playdowns. And while I stand by the fact that it's the worst, it has been the worst one, she was delightful and told me a great story that the final of the men's this year, of course, a great clip where Krista McCarville and the team are in the car and watching. One of the reasons why it was so hard for them to see is that the stream went down in the last end. So Laura is doing that on her phone.
Okay.
So she's in the crowd. She starts getting some text from people saying the stream stopped working. So she goes on Facebook Live with her phone, and that's why that angle is so bad. Not that what the stream in general is the greatest in the country, because again, my apologies, but it's not. But that helps account for that story a little bit.
Okay, because when I turned into that game, I was like, "What is happening?"
Yeah.
Okay, well that's good still. Well, glad that you got to see Laura. Maybe we'll be able to have her on at some point.
Yeah, I think we should
talk about the Northern Ontario Curling Association. Explain to some people why it's a thing. Yeah, that would be pretty fun.
Yeah, so shout out to her, and again, thanks to everyone up there in North Bay for a wonderful time, and we'll look forward to hopefully going back, if not next year, at some point. And summer spiels. It's hard to convince me that they're going to be fun, like in the moment. Like 2 days before, I'm like, do I really want to do this? But then I go and I always have a good time.
Yeah.
So there you go. So that's going to be it for us this week. Again, thanks everybody so much for listening. We'll be back with you real soon. But until then, keep those brooms on the ice and don't dump that insert.
Make the final.